The massive alien warship floated silently through space like a giant metal beast. Inside its cold corridors, Emperor Korax sat on his throne made of some strange purple crystal. His 6 eyes glowed red in the darkness as he waited for his soldiers to bring him the latest prisoner. Korax was not like the monsters from human movies. He stood 12 feet tall with skin that looked like polished black stone. 4 arms stretched from his massive chest, each ending in claws that could crush steel. But the most terrifying thing about him was his mind. No one in the entire galaxy could read his thoughts. His species, the Valerians, had evolved perfect mental shields over millions of years. The doors slid open with a hiss. 2 Valerian soldiers dragged in a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25 years old. Her name was Keisha Williams, and she came from a human colony called New Detroit that the aliens had just destroyed. Her dark skin was covered in dirt and her clothes were torn, but her eyes burned with something that made even the Emperor pause. Another human survivor, General Vex announced, his voice sounding like grinding metal. This one claims she has special abilities. Korax leaned forward on his throne. He had conquered 4 to 7 different species across the galaxy. Humans were supposed to be weak creatures with primitive technology and no psychic powers at all. Their planet Earth had fallen in just 3 days when the Valerian fleet arrived. Most colonies surrendered without even fighting. What special abilities? The Emperor asked, his voice echoing through the throne room. Keisha stood up straight despite the energy chains around her wrists. She looked directly at the massive alien ruler without any fear in her eyes. The other prisoners they had brought before always cowered and begged. This one was different. I can hear your thoughts, she said simply. The entire throne room erupted in laughter. Valerian generals, advisors, and guards all clicked their mandibles in amusement. The sound was like 1,000 insects buzzing at once. Even Emperor Korax couldn't help but chuckle, a deep rumbling sound that made the floor vibrate. Impossible, General Vex scoffed. No species in the galaxy can penetrate Valerian mental barriers. We have tested this with the most powerful psychics from every world we have conquered. The humans don't even have natural telepathy, another advisor added. Their brains are too primitive. But Keisha just stood there calmly, waiting for the laughter to die down. When the throne room finally grew quiet, she tilted her head slightly and looked directly into Korax's glowing red eyes. You're thinking about your brother Vex right now, she said in a steady voice. Not the general standing beside you, but your real brother. The one you had to kill to become emperor. The smile disappeared from Korax's face instantly. The laughter stopped so suddenly it was like someone had turned off a switch. Every creature in the room stared at the small human woman in shock. You remember the day clearly, Keisha continued, her voice never wavering. He was standing on the balcony of the old palace. You came up behind him with the ceremonial blade. He turned around just before you struck, and he wasn't angry. He was sad. His last words were, "Mother would be ashamed of what you've become." The throne room was so quiet now that you could hear the hum of the ship's engines in the walls. Emperor Korax gripped the arms of his throne so hard that cracks appeared in the crystal. His 4 hands shook slightly as he stared at this impossible human. No one knew about his brother. The official record said that Prince Vex had died in an accident during military training. Korax had personally destroyed every witness and every piece of evidence. He had never spoken those final words to another living soul, not even to his most trusted advisors. How? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Your mind is like an open book to me, Keisha replied. I can see your thoughts as clearly as if you were speaking them out loud. General Vex stepped forward, his own eyes now glowing brighter with anger and confusion. This is some kind of trick. She must have spies, or stolen information from our databases. But Emperor Korax knew better. Those memories weren't stored in any database. They lived only in the deepest, most protected part of his mind, behind layers of mental barriers that had taken his species millions of years to develop. If this human could truly access them, then everything they believed about themselves and their superiority was wrong. The most powerful ruler in the galaxy sat frozen on his throne, staring at a young woman from a conquered world who had just shattered his understanding of reality with nothing but words. Emperor Korax paced back and forth in his private chambers, all 4 arms crossed behind his back. The conversation with the human woman had happened 3 days ago, but he couldn't get it out of his mind. He had barely slept, barely eaten. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Keisha's calm face staring back at him. It has to be a trick, he muttered to himself. There's no other explanation. But deep down, a cold fear was growing in his chest. What if it wasn't a trick? What if this human really could do what she claimed? The next morning, he called for his best telepathic interrogators. The Valerians had conquered several species with natural psychic abilities over the centuries. They kept the strongest ones as prisoners, forcing them to serve the Empire by reading the minds of captured enemies. In the ship's detention center, another human prisoner watched through the energy bars of his cell. Damon Jackson had been a neuroscientist on New Detroit before the attack. He was a tall, quiet man with graying hair who had spent his life studying how the human brain worked. Now he was just another prisoner, but he had been paying attention to everything that happened on this ship. "They are bringing in the mind readers," he told Keisha as the guards escorted her past his cell. "Be careful." Keisha nodded but didn't look worried. "I'll be fine," she said softly. The testing room was a sterile white chamber with a single chair in the center. Keisha sat down calmly as the first interrogator entered. It was a Zentorian, a species that looked like a cross between a human and an octopus. Their tentacle-covered heads could probe minds like a surgeon's scalpel. "Let me see what secrets hide in your primitive brain," the creature hissed as it approached. But the moment its tentacles touched Keisha's forehead, something unexpected happened. The Zentorian screamed and jerked backward as if it had been electrocuted. Its eyes rolled back in its head and it began speaking in a panicked voice. "The gambling debts," it gasped. "Commander Rix owes 2 million credits to the crime syndicate on Kepler Station. He's been selling our military patrol schedules to pay them back." Emperor Corax, who was watching through a security monitor, leaned forward in shock. Commander Rix was one of his most trusted officers. How could this human know about his secret gambling problem? The next interrogator was a scion from the Andromeda sector. These beings were pure energy wrapped in artificial bodies, capable of diving into the deepest memories. But when it tried to probe Keisha's mind, the same thing happened. The scion suddenly began revealing embarrassing secrets about General Vex. "He writes poetry," the energy being said in a mechanical voice. "Romantic poetry about a female officer who doesn't even know he exists. He keeps the poems hidden in a locked drawer in his quarters." One by one, each telepathic interrogator tried to break into Keisha's mind. Instead, she turned their own abilities against them, forcing them to reveal the private thoughts and hidden shames of every high-ranking officer in the Valerian fleet. The court erupted into chaos as decades of carefully hidden secrets came pouring out. Officers who had been friends for years suddenly glared at each other with suspicion and anger. Trust evaporated like water on a hot stone. "General Zeth has been planning to poison the Emperor's food next week," Keisha announced calmly during one session. "He's already bribed 3 kitchen workers and obtained the toxin from a black market dealer on Proxima 7. When they searched General Zeth's quarters, they found the poison exactly where Keisha said it would be. The general was dragged away screaming that he had never told anyone about his plan. "Captain Voss has been embezzling funds from the military budget to support his drug addiction," she continued. "The missing money is hidden in an account on the Outer Rim. Account number 7749 Delta Omega." Again, everything she said proved to be true. Captain Voss broke down and confessed when confronted with the evidence. Each revelation sent shockwaves through the command structure. Officers who had served together for decades suddenly couldn't trust each other. Paranoia spread like a disease through the ship's corridors. Everyone wondered what secrets this human might reveal about them next. Emperor Corax watched his carefully organized empire begin to crumble from within. This wasn't military conquest or political maneuvering. This was something far more dangerous. With nothing but words, this small human woman was destroying the foundation of trust that held his entire command structure together. In his private chambers that night, Corax stared out at the stars and felt true fear for the first time in his life. If Keisha Williams could expose secrets that were supposed to be impossible to discover, what else might she be capable of? And more importantly, what did she want? The most powerful being in the galaxy was beginning to realize that he might have finally met someone more dangerous than himself. A week had passed since the interrogations began, and Emperor Corax's ship felt like a different place entirely. Officers whispered in corners, afraid of what secrets might spill from their minds next. The once proud Valerian command structure was falling apart, piece by piece. But something even stranger was happening to Keisha Williams. Dr. Malik Hassan, a biochemist who had been captured from the same colony, noticed it first. He was in the cell next to Damon Jackson, and both men had been watching Keisha carefully during her daily walks to the testing chambers. "She's changing," Malik whispered to Damon through the energy bars. "Did you see how she moved yesterday? It was like she knew exactly where each guard would step before they took the step." Damon nodded grimly. As a neuroscientist, he understood the human brain better than most people. What he was seeing didn't make sense according to everything he knew about how minds worked. During the next testing session, things got even more disturbing. Keisha sat in the white chair as usual, but this time she spoke before Emperor Corax could even ask his questions. "You're going to ask me about the rebellion on Titan 7, she said calmly. "But you haven't decided to ask that question yet. It won't occur to you for another 37 seconds. Corax felt a chill run down his spine. He had been thinking about asking her something completely different. But as he sat there, the thought about the Titan 7 rebellion slowly crept into his mind, exactly as she had predicted. "You're also going to stand up and walk to the left side of the room," Keisha continued. "Not because you want to, but because you'll suddenly feel like the air is too warm on your right side." The Emperor tried to resist, but sure enough, he found himself feeling uncomfortably hot. Without thinking, he stood and moved to the left, exactly as she had said he would. "How are you doing this?" he demanded, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm not doing anything," Keisha replied. "I'm just seeing what's already there. Your mind is like a river, and I can see where it's flowing before the water gets there." But that wasn't the worst part. As the days went on, Keisha began accessing thoughts that Corax didn't even know he was having. She spoke about his body's automatic responses before they happened, predicted when his heart rate would increase, when his stomach would growl, even when he would blink. "Your left foot is starting to hurt," she said during one session. "Not because you injured it, but because you're unconsciously shifting your weight to avoid putting pressure on an old scar. You got that scar when you were 7 years old, falling off a climbing structure on your home world." Corax looked down at his foot in horror. He hadn't been thinking about any scar, but now that she mentioned it, he could feel the slight ache beginning. And yes, there was indeed a small mark on his left foot from a childhood accident he had completely forgotten. The most terrifying moment came during the 10th day of testing. Keisha suddenly went completely still, her eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. When she spoke, her voice sounded different, older somehow. "The ancestors are screaming," she whispered, her body trembling. "They're trying to tell you something, but something else is blocking their voices." "What ancestors?" Corax demanded, but he felt a strange recognition stirring deep in his mind. "Your people," she continued in that strange, distant voice. "Long ago, before the barriers, before the shields. They're buried deep in your genetic memory, crying out for you to remember." Suddenly, images flashed through Corax's mind. Not his own memories, but something much older. He saw Valerians with softer faces, their eyes bright with kindness instead of cruelty. He saw cities built from crystal and light, not the dark metal fortresses of his empire. He saw his people reaching out to other species with open hands instead of weapons. "This is impossible," he gasped. "These aren't real memories. The Valerian Empire has always been a conquering force." But the images kept coming. Valerians healing the sick instead of creating them. Valerian artists creating beautiful works instead of instruments of war. Valerian leaders who govern through wisdom and compassion rather than fear and violence. "Your people weren't always like this," Keisha said, her voice growing stronger. "Something changed you. Something that lives in your minds even now, hiding behind those barriers you're so proud of." She opened her eyes and looked directly at him. For a moment, Corax saw something in her gaze that made his blood freeze. It wasn't just understanding or pity. It was horror. "The barriers in your minds aren't protecting your thoughts," she whispered. "They're protecting something else. Something that doesn't belong there." The revelation came during what should have been a routine questioning session. Keisha sat in the white chair, but this time something was different. Her eyes had a distant look, as if she was seeing far beyond the walls of the interrogation room. Emperor Corax watched nervously from behind the reinforced glass. Over the past 2 weeks, this human woman had turned his ordered world upside down. His most trusted officers were in prison. His command structure was in ruins. And now she was claiming that his people's greatest evolutionary advantage was actually some kind of trap. "Show me," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Show me what you see." Keisha closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. But instead of touching his conscious thoughts, she dove deeper, past the barriers that protected Valerian minds, past the learned memories of a lifetime, down to the very foundation of what made Corax who he was. What she found there made her gasp in horror. "They're not part of you," she breathed. "The barriers, they're alive." Dr. Malik Hassan and Damon Jackson watched from their cells through the security monitors that the guards had carelessly left on. Both men leaned closer to their screens, sensing that something important was about to happen. "What do you mean, alive?" Corax demanded. Keisha's body began to shake as she pushed her abilities further than ever before. "I can see them now. Tiny creatures, millions of them, wrapped around every neuron in your brain. They are feeding on your thoughts, your emotions, your very consciousness. The images came flooding into Corax's mind through their psychic connection. He saw his own brain from the inside, but it wasn't what he expected. Covering every neural pathway were microscopic organisms that looked like tiny black worms. They pulsed with a dark energy as they consumed the electrical signals that made up his thoughts. "This is what you call evolution," Keisha continued, her voice growing stronger despite her obvious pain. "These parasites invaded your species millions of years ago. They didn't give you mental barriers to protect you. They created the barriers to protect themselves while they fed on you." The truth hit Corax like a physical blow. Every Valerian was taught from childhood that their psychic shields were a sign of their superiority over other species. They were the chosen ones, the naturally evolved masters of the galaxy. But if what this human was showing him was true, then they weren't masters at all. They were cattle. "You're lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Look deeper," Keisha urged. "Remember what your people were like before the infection." More images flooded his consciousness. Ancient Valerian texts spoke of a golden age when their people were known throughout the galaxy as healers and peacekeepers. They had been natural telepaths, able to share thoughts and emotions freely with each other and with other species. Their empire hadn't been built on conquest but on cooperation. Then came the Dark Time, the period that Valerian historians called the Great Awakening. According to the official records, this was when their species evolved their mental barriers and began their rightful expansion across the galaxy. But now Corax was seeing the truth behind those sanitized history books. The parasites had arrived on a ship from dark space, beyond the edge of the galaxy. They were refugees, they claimed, fleeing some terrible disaster. The compassionate Valerians had welcomed them, not knowing that these creatures fed on psychic energy. The infection spread slowly at first, taking generations to fully establish itself. As the parasites grew stronger, they began influencing their hosts' behavior. Peaceful Valerians became aggressive. Healers became conquerors. The natural telepathic abilities that had made them such a wise and connected species were gradually suppressed, replaced by the artificial barriers that kept the truth hidden. "Your people fought back at first," Keisha said, tears streaming down her face as she experienced the ancient pain. "Some of them figured out what was happening. But the parasites were too well established by then. They used your own military against the resistance." Corax saw flashes of civil war, of Valerian fighting Valerian as the infected battled the few who remained free. The parasites won by sheer numbers, and the last uninfected Valerians were either killed or forcibly infected. "The worst part," Keisha whispered, "is that somewhere deep inside, your people remember. The parasites can't completely erase genetic memory. That's why you have those dreams about flying, about touching the minds of others with love instead of conquest. Those aren't fantasies. They're echoes of what you used to be." Emperor Corax fell to his knees as the full horror of his situation became clear. His entire species was enslaved, and they didn't even know it. Every act of cruelty, every conquered world, every life taken in the name of Valerian superiority had actually been done to feed these hidden masters. "How many other species have we infected?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Dozens," Keisha replied sadly. "Every world you've conquered, the parasites spread to the survivors. That's the real purpose of your empire. You're not building anything. You're just creating more food sources for them." The revelation was complete. The mighty Valerian Empire was nothing more than a parasite's feeding operation, and its greatest champion had just learned he was really its slave. The silence in the interrogation room stretched on for what felt like hours. Emperor Corax knelt on the cold metal floor, his four massive arms trembling as the weight of the truth crushed down on him. Everything he had believed about himself, his people, and his empire was a lie. Keisha opened her eyes and looked at the broken ruler with something that might have been pity. "I know this is hard to accept," she said gently. "But you have a choice now. You can pretend this conversation never happened and go back to being a slave, or you can help me free your people." "Free them?" Corax's voice was barely a whisper. "How is that even possible? These parasites have been in our minds for millions of years. Removing them would kill us." "Not necessarily," came a voice from the security monitor. Dr. Malik Hassan had somehow managed to patch into the communication system from his cell. "I've been listening to everything, and I think I have an idea." The guards rushed to shut off the monitor, but Corax held up a hand to stop them. "Let him speak." "The parasites feed on psychic energy," Malik continued, his face appearing on the screen. "But they're also dependent on it. If we could create a frequency that disrupts their feeding process while simultaneously strengthening the host's natural mental abilities, we might be able to starve them out. Damon Jackson's face appeared next to his fellow prisoner. It would be like fighting fire with fire. Use the Valerians' suppressed telepathic abilities to burn out the creatures that are suppressing them. Keisha nodded slowly. It could work. My brain doesn't have these barriers because humans evolved without the parasites. I can see the frequency patterns they use to maintain control. But I would need help to broadcast it across an entire ship. Emperor Korak stood up, his decision made. What do you need? The next few hours were the strangest in Valerian military history. The most powerful ruler in the galaxy worked alongside 3 human prisoners to build a device that would destroy everything he had ever known. They used parts from the ship's communication array, medical equipment, and even some components from the telepathic interrogation devices. As they worked, other prisoners began to take notice. Captain Torres, a human pilot from the destroyed colony, volunteered to help with the technical assembly. Lieutenant Brown, a former engineer, offered her expertise with the ship's power systems. Even some of the Valerian guards began to show interest, though they didn't fully understand what was happening. The hardest part will be the initial broadcast, Keisha explained as they made final adjustments to their makeshift device. I'll need to touch the mind of every Valerian on this ship simultaneously. The psychic strain could kill me. There might be another way, Korak said thoughtfully. Our ship's neural network is connected to every crew member through their communication implants. If you could use that as a carrier wave. That's brilliant, Damon said with genuine admiration. Instead of trying to reach everyone individually, you'd be using their own technology against the parasites. They activated the device just after midnight, ship time. Keisha sat in the center of a circle formed by the cobbled-together equipment, her hands placed on neural interface pads that Korax had removed from his own command throne. Remember, she said to the Emperor, when your people start to remember who they really are, they're going to be angry. Very angry. Are you ready for that? Korax nodded grimly. They have every right to be. The moment Keisha activated the frequency, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the massive warship, Valerian crew members suddenly stopped what they were doing. Some fell to their knees, clutching their heads as ancient memories came flooding back. Others cried out as they felt emotions they hadn't experienced in their entire lives. In the engine room, a Valerian technician named Korath suddenly remembered his grandmother's lullabies, songs about peace and love that had been buried for decades. In the medical bay, Dr. Voss felt overwhelming compassion for the human prisoners she had been ordered to experiment on. On the bridge, officers who had spent their careers planning conquests suddenly understood the pain they had caused to countless innocent beings. The parasites fought back desperately, sending waves of confusion and anger through their hosts. But Keisha's frequency was stronger, amplified by the natural telepathic abilities of the Valerians themselves as they began to awaken. One by one, the tiny black creatures began to die, their death throes visible as brief flashes of dark energy that dissolved into nothing. As they died, the artificial barriers in Valerian minds crumbled, replaced by their species' natural psychic gifts. Emperor Korax was the first to experience the full transformation. As the last parasite in his brain withered away, he suddenly felt the minds of every being on his ship. Not as subjects to be controlled, but as individuals with their own hopes, fears, and dreams. The human prisoner's pain hit him like a physical blow, followed immediately by the confused terror of his own crew as they struggled to understand what was happening to them. But strongest of all was a feeling he had never experienced before, genuine empathy for other living beings.